everybody for joining us. My name is Abel Nunez. I am the executive director of the Central American Resource, and I will be moderating the webinar. Before I introduce our invited speakers, let me just tell you a little bit about the delegation. From February 19th to the 23rd, Carece DC and Alianza Americas organized an educational delegation to El Salvador to learn current country conditions and root causes of migration. The delegation, besides our guests, also included representatives from the philanthropic community, from the Meyer Foundation here in Washington, D.C., the Washington Regional Association of Grant Makers, and Hispanics in Philanthropy. But today we have the participation of our elected officials that join us in the delegation to give us their impression of what they saw. I will ask our guests some guiding questions, but then we'll open it up to our participants to see if there are any additional questions that people may want to ask. So first, just want to quickly introduce Congressman Glenn Ivey. He has been recently elected to Maryland's 4th District, and so he's joining us today. But we also have Mahasan El Amin, who is the clerk of the court of Prince George's County, and Canek Aguirre, who is a council member for the city of Alexandria. All represent their districts that have high Salvadorian populations. And for those that may not know, the Washington metropolitan area has the 2nd largest Salvadorian population in the U.S., and also making them the largest foreign-born population. So basically, Salvadorans are majority in this area. Under this context, I want to begin the report back. But first, I want to ask our guest, Congressman Glenn Ivey, Mahasan El Amin, clerk of the court, and Canek, if you would like to add anything to the brief presentation that I just gave that doesn't do you justice before we actually begin the questions.
That's fine with me.
Yes, I say let's get started.
All right. So without any further ado, I'll begin with the first question for all of you. And I will start with Congressman Ivey. First of all, why were you interested in participating in this delegation?
Well, in part, it's what you just said. I mean, we have a very large population, some immigrants, some born here, and some, and so I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to get to know the community better. I got to know a lot of our Latino community immigrants and when I first became state's attorney back in 2002. And I quickly realized that there were, not for everybody, but for many of them had very different needs. And so we had to actually build out some of the services we were providing, like access to information in Spanish, websites. We got English on and Spanish on the same business cards, like that sort of thing. But, in the race for Congress, I thought, if I really want to get to know the community better, it probably makes sense to actually go. So we have that sort of homeland in common. When I was running for office, a lot of the African American community connects with my being from Rocky Mount, North Carolina, because a lot of them are from North and South Carolina. And when we meet and talk, we have that sense of place in common. And so I wanted to go to El Salvador and see if I could develop that as well. And then now that I'm in Congress also, there's an international aspect to what we do here. I'm not on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but, we deal with foreign policy and international relations on a daily basis. So I thought it makes sense from that perspective as well.
Thank you, Congressman. I'll turn it over to you, Mahasan, with the same question. Why were you interested in participating in this delegation?
Well, like everything that the congressman has said, our high population of Latinos in the county, along with being able to listen and learn. There's nothing like being immersed in someone's environment to really understand and have an appreciation for where they come from and some of the issues that they face. Being in the courthouse, it can be very scary, actually often scary, when you don't know how to navigate it. And we do have a high population of non-English speaking customers who come here, who are seeking things from buying a house and recording their deeds, to getting married, to domestic violence, child support, custody, and some criminal cases. And so being able to understand, definitely have some empathy, and as well as making sure that they have the services in Spanish speaking. So one of the things that I did when I first took office was to make sure that we had translators available for when people come to the counter, because we are really basically the heartbeat, the face of the courthouse, where we interact with the users and the residents and the citizens more often than, let's say, a judge does. And so it's, like I said, it's a very scary process. And I just wanted to, like I said, be able to have that opportunity to really get a real understanding of the environment or the situation in which they left, or where they from, where they grew up. So it was definitely an amazing experience. I learned a lot, and I'm really excited to talk about and share my experiences with this panel today.
Thank you, Mahasen. So Connect, finally you. Why were you interested in going?
Yeah, for me, I feel like it's a long time coming. I'm originally from Los Angeles, so I'm from the largest, diaspora of the El Salvadorian community. And from LA, I ended up in the second largest El Salvadorian diaspora outside of El Salvador. So, much like Glenn and Mahasen said, honestly, to be able to do our jobs better, we really need to be able to know our population. We need to know the history of that population. And this delegation really outlined in full, not just the history, but also the details around a lot of trauma that's been experienced by the Salvadorian people through the politics and through society and everything that's been happening over the last, 6 decades or so. So I have a lot of the same reasons, just getting to know the people that I serve better, to make sure that I am creating more access for them as well. And just, it's like I said, for me, it's a long time coming. And I've actually had, when I first got elected, I had a couple of residents that had approached me and said, we want you to go to El Salvador. We want to show you areas here. And I'll share really quickly. So here in Alexandria, we have a small community. The technical name, or the official name, is Arlandria, but because of the longtime influence of the Salvadorian population, the neighborhood is collectively known in our area as Chirilagua. And that's a small city in El Salvador. And when the Spanish news channels come, they don't say they're in Alexandria, Virginia. They don't say they're in Arlandria, Virginia. They say they're in Chirilagua, Virginia. So over a short amount of time, the small population has been able to do so much and have so much influence. So that's, part of the impetus to go. And like everyone else said, it's a very powerful delegation. Really, really glad that I participated.
Thank you. So my second question, and I want to put some context to our audience, is that it was designed for the participants to hear from multiple voices. So we've heard from the NGOs, community organizations that are working to prevent migration from El Salvador and social justice. We also heard from government officials, right? We met with multiple government agencies and their perspective of where the country is and where it's going. And we also met with the U.S. government. So we had a meeting with the U.S. Embassy to give us sort of their perspective of where they see the country and how to move it forward. So the big question that I have is basically, what did you learn, and what is your perspective on the current conditions in El Salvador, right? So from what you learned, and I'll switch the order around a little bit. So Mahasen, if you would want to begin, I'll start with you.
Well, first I want to say that's a loaded question. Because my perspective, I'll say this, my perspective of the country is one that it's the people make it amazing. And that I'm also happy to be an American that has rights and that has a justice system and where I have access. I think one of the people that we spoke to said something that resonated to me the most was that people can't fight for democracy if they've never had it. And then also another person said that there's intergenerational trauma that's stemming from, the violence in the country over the years. And it's a very complicated issue. And right now with the current government, with their state of exceptions being able to basically declare martial law for an infinite amount of time, and locking gang members up and anyone who's associated with gang members, just so the people can have some peace. It's very interesting because from an outsider's perspective, I think it's awful. It's awful the conditions that people are being faced with right now. But if you're living in that decade after decade, years after years of not being able to feel safe, having the ability to have that moment of peace, which that's what the government is, supposedly doing. Is that right? Is that something? But who am I to say that having a 96% approval rating, that's what the president has on the state of exception. Who am I to say that that's wrong? That's unfounded. Like, the people shouldn't want to feel safe. Another thing that I took away with is just the resilience of El Salvadorians. I mean, it's just, they've been through so much and they're happy, they're proud to be Salvadorian, and they want to be there. They don't want to leave their country, but they do it because of, they have no other means, whether it's fighting or whether it's, their poverty, and they're remitting money back. And so I definitely, like I said, I definitely have a different perspective going in a different perspective now that I've been back. And it was, like I said, once again, it was an amazing experience. It was filled with a lot of dense information. My heart goes out to all Salvadorians and all people who are being oppressed. But once again, like I said, I'm really just happy that as an American, we have access. We have the ability to get things from the government, information from the government, things that currently are not happening right now. So, like I said, it's a loaded question. I can go on for like hours.
No, I know it was very intense. I always say delegations are like a master class level, but you do it in very short amount of time. I'll turn it over now to Connect to kind of give his impacts of what he's learned. But before Connect, you start, just want to just tell folks, and I'll switch to Spanish, para todos aquellos que necesiten interpretación en español, se está brindando, pueden ir al globo abajo, y lo pueden oír esto en español. I was just mentioning the interpretation, something that we had to do over there, and so our members had the ability to do simultaneous. But Connect, same question to you. What have been sort of the high level, sort of what you learned, what's your perspective now of what you saw? I mean, it was an intense sort of 3 days of meeting with a lot of folks, but if you could just share with folks, what were your impressions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Intense has definitely been the word that I've been using to describe to folks when I got back to Alexandria. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I got back, I said, oh, wow, we were running like 13, 14-hour days, starting at 7 and ending at 8 or 9 at night. I agree with Mahassan, it's a loaded question. It's a very complicated question, right? Sometimes, we say in the US, sunlight is the best disinfectant, but even when you talk to folks, folks are like, but I feel safer, right? The president has like a approval rating in the mid 80s to high 80s. And as Mahassan said, the exception rule, state of exception has got like a 90+% approval rating. And it's like, but you do realize that people are being locked up. It's like, yeah, but I feel safe. I could go outside. And who are we to say that that's not, a big improvement? And the other thing that Mahassan said too, like that stuck with me as well, is just, if you don't know what democracy was, or you've never really seen real democracy, then how are you supposed to fight for it or say that that's right or wrong? So it is a very difficult situation. And then you think, well, what is it exactly that we could potentially do from the outside? And that's an even more complicated question, right? Because you talk about a double-edged sword and the involvement of the United States, not just in El Salvador over the, decades, but, all of Latin America, if you will, going all the way back to the Monroe Doctrine. So how exactly are we supposed to create influence and change, but do it in a fair and just way? So and I think about the conversation with the U.S. ambassador and just kind of saying, well, we can't try and take away money because they'll just laugh at that. They're like, well, we'll keep on going with what we're doing. So it's a very loaded question. I'm honestly still struggling with it myself as to what we could do. I guess the one thing we can do is with the diaspora that is in the States is just continually have that conversation with what's going on, with the fact that, the ruling party has a veto-proof legislature majority. They dissolved the Supreme Court, and they're not having any trials. The trial is basically to find out how long you're going to be in jail. And I mean, the other really scary part to me too was that you don't even know the names of the judges, right? The judges are some type of serial number. So there's a lot of things that are going on that, it's a big trade-off. So I'm not too sure at this point. I'm still kind of contemplating that myself.
Thank you, Connect. A couple of things. We did lose the interpretation. We're going to try to get it back. There was a quick question, just in response, because they mentioned both Hassan and Connect about the approval ratings. Those approval ratings are done by multiple places. They are legitimate. It's not just the government saying that. Multiple sources so those numbers are real. The 96 approval rating are done by outside and external pollers. The administration polls almost every day, not just their own numbers, but outside entities. So the numbers are clear. So Glenn, I'll turn it over to you to kind of your learning. Like you said, you've had a contact with the community here in your district when you were state's attorney, and now in your new function, as a candidate, but now as a congressman. Kind of what can you tell them in terms of what did you learn? What were your impressions? What sort of stuck with you? What you heard Connect and Hassan sort of responses, but I'll turn it over to you and just really, we want to hear where you're at, a week later after coming back.
No, that's a fair question, and I agree with their points. I mean, it was bigger and deeper and wider than I had expected. I mean, I knew that there were issues with respect to the president, the moves that he'd made with the legislature and the judiciary. I didn't know that basically it just totally taken control of the country. And I didn't know how extensive the martial law special exception was. I think the biggest surprise, though, was and some of this happened after we got back. So when they rolled out the transfer of these prisoners to the new Supermax jail, and the images that the president, presented were unsettling, to say the least. I mean, I was really taken aback at not only what was going on there, but the fact that they thought it would be good to show this. But here's the thing, and I guess this is the irony of this, or the dilemma we've got. People in El Salvador like what he's doing. The people who are from there and here like what he's doing, and wholeheartedly. It's not like they're okay with it. I mean, they're enthusiastic about the change because it has had a direct impact on their lives for the better. And so the tension is trying to figure out a way to present the government with something that not only that they can do, but they're willing to do. We did the outreach. In my meeting with the vice president, we talked a little bit about this. I don't know that they're going to be interested, but, the Department of Justice providing assistance or funding to sort of help with bond hearings. Small step, but maybe a step in the right direction. Certainly for people who were there who can get out, were arrested improperly or illegally or mistakenly. I think getting out as many of those people as we can is a good first step. And I'm hoping that we can persuade the government to at least consider it. If, especially since it wouldn't cost taxpayers in El Salvador $1 or even a cent necessarily, depending on, whether the Department of Justice funds it all up front. And the other part, I guess, we have to figure out is if there are other ways that we can try and maintain contacts and communications with the government. I was talking to one of my colleagues here on the House floor who was, they basically severed ties with him. And, we were also told by the ambassador that the president hasn't agreed to meet with the ambassador. And, he's made that kind of strongly negative statements about President Biden. On the one hand, you want to try and maintain communications and have contact because that's the only way that you can, have some sort of dialogue. But, it takes two to tango. So I don't know if there's going to be an interest in that. But, that the goal I have at this point is to try and make myself available, and there's nothing special about me particularly, but and certainly I'm not the most knowledgeable on El Salvador. If they've got somebody else that they want to work with or that we should present who's better positioned for that, great. But in the meantime, I'm happy to try and do what I can to help establish a dialogue and try and move things in a better direction.
Thank you, Congressman. Some questions are coming in, and I'll go to my final question first, and then I'll open it up. But just to quickly answer the person about, there's questions about the numbers, and some of the polling is done by La UCA, which is the the Catholic University of Central America. Gallup polled. So there are multiple entities doing polling. So there, the government has its own polling. There may be things that they may not be accurate about in terms of what they're projecting, but it is clear that he has a very solid approval rating in El Salvador, which are in the 80s. No one is questioning that. No one from either side, either in the government or outside of government, questions the polling as it relates to the regimen of exception or his own personal polling. So that's, I think that there are other things that they may question about information that the government is putting out, but not that. But I do want to, and before we open it up to the questions, because there are great questions coming in, I'm going to try to get to as many of them as I can. But I will start with Connect. So we have our elected officials are different levels, right? We have a congressman, we have a county official, and we have a municipal official. So Connect, now that you've been back, and there's a lot of learning. Yeah, it was a loaded question that I asked you before, but the experience that you gain from the delegation, how do you think that you can use that in your function, right, as a municipal elected official? How is this trip going to help you move forward in your role?
So, I think the immediate thing that came to mind was trying to create a baseline for staff in our community to have a better understanding of what the history of El Salvador is and what it's meant to its people. I know that Latino Heritage Month is still several months away, but I think that's definitely one place that we can highlight certain things to, again, like I said, start creating this baseline. The other one is I really want to speak with my colleagues on the school board, because when we talk about generational trauma, when we talk about having to go through a civil war, to live through gangs, to just try and come to this country, crossing the border, and all of those experiences, are a lot of the teachers just don't know that, don't understand that, haven't had an opportunity to learn about it, right? And like I said, as elected officials, but many public servants, you're not able to really do your job properly or do it better if you don't have an understanding of the history of the folks that you're serving. So I really want to talk to my school board colleagues about some of that and getting a baseline for some of our school teachers and administrators to have a better understanding with what they're dealing with in our education system. The other thing that caught my eye when we were at UCA, there was, I believe, a resolution or proclamation from the DC Council. And I think that's another way to highlight, bring attention to, and recognize the Salvadorian population here, as in Alexandria specifically. So that's something that I'm going to be looking at as well. Like I said, to highlight and show what the Salvadorian population has been doing here in Alexandria, and their contributions. So that's a little bit of what I've thought about so far. And to be fair, some of the other things around access, about interpretation, those are things that I've kind of known about, and I've actually changed here in the city, and I've already started working on multilingual multimedia. How are we doing outreach, recognizing literacy levels even within our own Spanish speaking community, because what good is it if you translate it into Spanish if you can't read it? So using infographics and the like. So there's different things that we've already kind of started doing work on, but after the trip, definitely a resolution or proclamation, highlighting some more things during Latino Heritage Month, and really trying to work a little bit more with the school system to have a better understanding with the teachers and what they're working with.
Thank you, Connect. I'll turn over to Mahazen. You mentioned a little bit about what your office does, but now that you've sort of been through this experience, how do you think that you will bring that to your office in Prince
We
George's?
need more. Yeah, we need more. We have a tendency to do, our translations in person, but just like Connect said, making sure that we have like our brochures, our social media, our outreach to the community or to the county definitely needs to be multilingual. Also, I'm in the community a lot. I go to a lot of community events, and like I said before, the court system is very complicated. There's a lot of different levels, but there are also a lot of resources that are available to litigants. And so I want to make sure that members of the community, Salvadorians, they understand, they know where they can go get resources from. And I also, I will be bringing this information to our judges. It's not just the folks who do special juvenile status cases, but just to know why are people in some of the situations that they're in, and just to have a level of understanding. That's what I can do in my capacities now, is just share all the knowledge that I learned once I'm still decompressing it. It's still a lot of information that I'm trying to put all into one, like, I guess, tight bow. But I definitely working with our justice partners, from our state's attorney, sheriff's office, and things like that, to let them know what I learned and how we can work together to better facilitate the judicial process in Prince George's County. Thank
you, Mahazen. And Congressman, you began speaking about some of the things that you were doing with the Justice Department. In full disclosure, Congressman, he is my congressman, my representative. I'm extremely pleased that we have a champion in Congress to fight for us for all multiple issues here in the district that he represents. But now, in your new role as congressman, and you were mentioning you're 30 some days into the job, maybe a little bit more now. What do you think that you can do from your end? You're in a body that's not the only decision maker. You have colleagues not only from your same side of the party, but also from the other side. And we know how immigration is a very contentious issue right now in Congress. But what do you think you can do as a congressman, as a representative of the 4th District of Maryland, from what you've heard in the delegation?
Yeah, I think there's sort of 3 levels. We've talked about 2 already. One is, trying to help with respect to what the government's doing down there, and that's the State Department, that's the ambassador, and Department of Justice and the like. We discussed that some already. The second is what we can do with the community, and Mahasen and was some of the things that we've talked about, some of the things I try to do with state's attorney, and build on those now. Somebody needs to mute. And then the third thing is what we can do here in Congress. Now, unfortunately,
Yeah, it's
Come back in 2 minutes.
Sorry,
somebody
Hazel,
needs to
Hazel,
mute.
yeah.
can you
This
or
guy is talking too much, man.
John C, can you mute that?
You see, that's why I said this guy's hiding. Look, hiding from me. He keep talking.
Hey, Porfirio, you need a
Yeah,
mute.
oh, thank you. Yeah. This
I
guy,
apologize for that. I think we got it. Go ahead.
All right, so the border security piece too is unfortunately a big part of this too. And as we heard in El Salvador, they're very proud of the fact that they've dropped in their numbers, I think from 3rd to like 14th, from people immigrating to the United States in recent times. They think it's because of the crackdown and the drop in gang violence and the like. And that may be correct. I think it's too soon to know for sure. And there are other things that could be factors on that, but it's significant and it's a lot, and it's relevant at some levels to the quasi debate we're having here on the Hill. I say quasi because really the Republicans are just aiming at attacking the Biden administration and trying to force a scenario where they can impeach Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, which I think is ridiculous, but that's where they're trying to go. But I think the larger question, and one of the most impressive points of the visit for me was when we saw the site where when people are brought back to El Salvador from the United States, whether it's deportation or something else, the facility they have, they call it the reception center, was really pretty impressive. I thought it was well put together, and the concept behind it is good. The wraparound services doesn't look like much from the outside, but when you get in there, they've really done a good job of building a place up that is, there to help a variety of people who have distress situations. Maybe it's domestic violence, or need a medical treatment, or trying to get back to a place where they have people they can stay with, or whatever it is. They seem to be really well prepared to try and address it. And so I thought that was the most impressive part of the visit.
Thank you, Congressman. Now I'm gonna turn it over to some of the questions that we've been getting on the chat. I will try to get to as many as we can. I can't promise that we'll get to all of them. I want to respect people's time. And also want to just note that there are other 2 members of the delegation that I saw on the list. Edgar Aranda Yanok from the Meyer Foundation. We have Josie Nippen from Hispanics Philanthropy that are also in this webinar, and we're members of that. But one of the questions here that I asked for Juan Isledona was asking, and you mentioned a little bit, Congressman, about the trends, the outward trends of migration from El Salvador, that it has significantly, we've seen a drop. But can any of you speak to what are still the push factors that are impacting? If violence is no longer one, or not the main one, can you kind of talk about what you heard from all the sectors about what are the continue to be the push factors? And that's open to all 3 of you.
I mean, I can start. I mean, some of the things that we've heard might be a factor are, yes, the crackdown and the reduction in violence in El Salvador. So that may have led to, a reduction in the number of people who feel like they have to go. There's a lot of, horror stories for people trying to make that trek too. So that might be a factor as well. And I think there may be other possibilities about what's going on in other countries. You may have had some that increased for reasons that are totally unrelated to El Salvador, which may have led them, El Salvador to drop in the rankings, not necessarily just because of what they've done, but because others have gone up. So I think it's a variety of factors. I think the bottom line, though, is yes, we want to do things to make things better, not only in El Salvador, but all of those countries where we're having the large immigration. But two quick things. One is, fixing the system in a way that facilitates immigration might be a good way to go. I mean, we've saw very recent drops of people coming from Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba in part because the United States has made it easier to get legal passage into the country. So people didn't feel like they had to do the illegal approach, that they're just trying to work through the process. And the upside on that is not only is it better organized, but it, you have less of sort of the dangers of people trying to walk the distances and, facing violence against them, or, being ripped off, or, sexual assault. Reducing all of those, I think, is a good way to go. And I think it would help too with respect to the optics of the issue. Frankly, the Republicans love to put up images of people at the border, climbing over fences or running across, whatever, to try and sort of gin up their base about how bad it is. It wouldn't hurt to take some of that stuff off as well. So I think it's a positive development that suggests that maybe we try a new approach. We can still have the interdiction and trying to block people coming, and the link to fentanyl is a lot of BS, but we can get into that if you want. But sort of separating that out and giving people more legal and safe passage, I think, is a good way to go.
Yeah, Connect or Mahasan, anything else to add on that? No, and I would say, as I'll take moderator's privilege here to say that the underlying structural conditions in El Salvador have not changed. So poverty is still rampant. The basic minimum wage is $300 for the service industry for monthly, but your ability to buy food for your house is around 400 when you add education. So there's still structural conditions in El Salvador that, even if we were to agree that the violence have gone down, and it has come down, it still has not fixed some of the issues that also are the reasons why people leave the country, right? Because even if poverty is a form of violence. And so I think that is, there are other questions about, there was one question here in your interactions with folks, or your sense of who you talk to, there's a lot of people, because the current government controls everything. Did you get a sense that some people were afraid to speak out, that there's just a sense that, well, if I say I'm not with this government, that there are going to be more repercussions? And I'll, ask you to kind of talk about that, if you felt that, or you saw that during your time there.
I mean, I think it really depended with who we were speaking, right? I think someone said, if you were in the chat as well, if you're speaking with kind of everyday workers at the hotel, restaurant workers, cab drivers, that other folks, I mean, they're happy with it, right? But if you were to speak with someone who's had a family member jailed, or someone who's working at the university, or someone who's working in the media, I mean, there's definitely a different feel, right? And especially when we were talking with folks from the media and from the university, how do I put this? It was almost like they were resigned to what was going to happen. Not that they were okay with it, but their name might already be on a list. And when he gets reelected as president, the danger for them increases, because they've already put all the gang members in jail and reduced the violence. And so now who's next, right? Who is the dissident against the government? And that becomes, universities, media, nonprofits and NGOs. So it really depends on who you were talking to in the country. And that's another way that I saw it.
And I agree with Hennick about us with the statements. I think that for those who had family members, part of the members of the delegation who had family members there, I can't remember who I was speaking with, but they basically said that their report back from their family was that they don't really like what the president's doing, but it's giving them hope. Just to be able to see that there is an opportunity to, let's say, decrease the violence, that it's possible. Do the means justify the ends? I don't think so, but I'm not living there every day. And so, I think I wrote down somewhere, as what is freedom worth? Is it worth, violence and or safety and, or giving up all of my civil rights? I cannot answer that question. I don't think it's fair for me to answer that question. But I think that they're being able to have an opportunity just to have some peace, that goes a long way to folks, to individuals. And then, I think our bus driver even said once, after driving us around for 3 days, I mean, he said he liked him, and that, he's doing good things. And even though he's not making a lot of money by far, but it's just giving them an opportunity to just breathe. I mean, that's invaluable, I think.
Yeah, so there are a lot of questions coming in about other issues, right? So in our time there, did you get a sense if from any of the folks from all the sectors that we spoke to that they would hear about, questions are saying, did we hear anything about the children that the dozens of children who have left without parents as a result of the 65,000 arrested? People want to know, did we hear anything about disappearances versus homicides, right? Or, do we hear anything about other marginalized communities like the LGBTQ community and what they're facing? And if you want to just speak to that, did we hear anything like that, or was that highlighted?
I mean, I think that sort of the consequences of what's happening, the government didn't really talk about that. We certainly had, we had other people, journalists, NGOs and the like, who talked about it. Actually, the one exception I guess I could make would be the woman who was running the reception center. She certainly talked about, not simply just in the terms of the incarceration, but, a lot of the factors that are separating children from their families, in El Salvador and in the United States, frankly. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that there was as big a focus on that as you'd like. And then I guess the other factor, and I actually tried to say this in some of my meetings to people, was sort of the American experience of this, going down this path. We didn't get there as fast as they've started out, but the war on drugs basically was the same kind of thing in a way. The edges were rounded off. It wasn't as, they weren't jumping, taking people away to the extent they are in El Salvador right now. But we definitely had our own version of that. I remember jump out squads, and we still have remnants of that with the driving while black car stops. And we're down from 2.2 million incarcerated, but we still have way too many people in jail. And one of the things that was a horrific collateral consequence to that was the impact on our kids, especially in the African American community, but not solely there. And the devastation to families, and the ripple effect of that is the kind of thing that I think that question tries to get at. It's a long-term question, and in the short run, where it's poll driven on a day-by-day basis, I don't know if that's going to be captured, but there's a reckoning that comes with this, sooner or later. And for us, it took decades to get there, and we're still sort of working through. But I'm hoping, and I sort of suggested this to some of the government officials, that El Salvador doesn't have to replicate our mistakes, that they should learn from our mistakes if possible, and try and benefit from that if they can.
And, I'd add also, just to, help with some of the framing, and I don't want to speak for the others in the delegation, but there was definitely a sense of, we need to tread lightly. There, as the congressman said, a lot of stuff when it came to marginalized communities was not addressed at all. Instead, what was highlighted was that El Salvador is the safest country in all of Latin America, and they have not had a single homicide in over 300 days, which frankly is probably not true. I'll just put it that way. And another thing too, I think, if I'm in Nabel, correct me if I'm wrong, I think El Salvador is actually surpassing the US per capita for folks that are imprisoned. That one really stuck out to me as well. And then going back to the total control of the government by this administration, the other thing that really stuck out to me when we were at UCA was the use of social media and the time that it takes, right? And I have to give a shout out again to Abel because he kind of put this on my radar when he first started talking about it. But usually to get a conversation going, it takes, anywhere between 48 and 72 hours on social media. The machine that they have going in El Salvador, they're doing this in 12 to 18 hours. So they're really controlling the narrative all across social media, the news channels. And so it's, how do you get away from that messaging when that's kind of the only messaging that you're seeing, right? So yeah, there's just a lot.
Yeah.
And Congressman, there's a question here, I think more for your response. It's someone asked about the current political process and elections coming up. So if we were to believe that Bukele was elected democratically in his current sort of term, that if he runs again and wins, there are questions about the constitutionality of his ability to serve a second term. The question is, has there been any discussions in Congress, and you may have not been, but at least your personal opinion of how the U.S. then should relate to a new administration that is highly questionable about whether he can run or not? I mean, he's going to be elected if everything we heard is correct, but there are questions about the legitimacy of his election in the next cycle. What do you think the U.S. should do in relationship to that, with if he would be to be elected again?
It's hard to know for sure, and I think we'll have to sort of play it by ear a little bit. But it does look to me like he's definitely going to be reelected one way or the other, in part because he's enormously popular. It was like 85% plus. I'm not even sure he's going to have an opponent. We were talking to one of the drivers about it, and he was like, he couldn't think of anybody, A, who would take him on, but B, who would have a chance anyway. So a lot of times when we're dealing with these kinds of issues, there's issues about not only legitimacy, but the sort of democracy from the standpoint of popular selection. I don't think that's going to be an issue here. He would be the runaway winner and probably will be unopposed. Now, here's the question. Is there any way to keep that in check? With the new legislature, since they're essentially sort of things have been set up. They're not all as popular as he is, but it looks like they're going to ride the wave with him as well. And with the sort of replacement of the judiciary, is there any kind of, check or balance there? I mean, the analogy I would draw is, after, I guess it was Bush 1, and he was enormously popular here in the United States. Yeah, I think he had numbers in the upper 70s, low 80s, because it was a military era. We were fighting, we'd been attacked, we were pushing back. But, he ended up losing the election in 92 because things changed so quickly. But, the difference was we had a different environment because you still had a Democratic Party that was viable and could put up a presidential candidate. So nothing's permanent in politics. His 85% ranking, polling numbers, will be here today, but, they'll be gone eventually. The question, though, really is there a loyal opposition? I mean, who else is there who could step up and actually make a go of it? and not only just for the presidential race, but also for the legislative races as well.
Thank you, Congressman. So we're coming close to the end of the hour, and I want to respect everybody's time. So, but before we end, there's some questions that we won't get to, but I'll make a commitment that we will answer them and give them back. This webinar is being recorded, so there will be a YouTube link that people can see it or share it with other folks. But I want to sort of end it by giving an opportunity to our guests today to kind of close us out, right? So, 3 days, a lot of learning. What are the 3 takeaways that you have right now from your experience? And what are the 3 things that you think you can quickly implement in your position, right? Because you all are at different levels of government. Because this delegation is about learning, but it was also about action, right? So again, if you can, and I'll start, Mahasan, with you. 3 things that you think that you took away from this, and 3 things that you think that you can implement in your role as clerk of the court of Francisco County.
Okay, so I think 3 things that my takeaways. One is that the world is very complicated. This is a very complicated issue, and it's going to take generations to unravel it. I've also took away that I can have more compassion, and I will have more compassion now. It's everything's not what I see on the media, what I'm seeing on my Twitter feed, what I'm hearing or seeing on the news. There's a bigger universe that exists that I am not aware of.
You're on mute, Mahasan.
Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Mahasan.
Great, sorry. That, honestly, I loved El Salvador. I love the people, like everyone treated us with the utmost respect. Everyone was friendly, not to mention the weather was great. And then in my capacity, once again, I think I've said several of them, making sure that I work with our justice partners, that we give more access to information, and that I tell the story. I tell the story of what I've learned. I mean, those are the things that I think that I can do.
All right, so you went on mute, so I'm assuming that.
Oh yeah, I was done. Yeah.
So, Connect, I'll turn it over to you. 3 things that you think you've taken away high level. 3 things that you think you can implement in your role as council member.
So I think number 1 that comes to mind is democracy is very fragile. Don't think for a minute that here in the U.S. we're that far away from El Salvador, right? We saw in the last administration doing a lot of things similar to what the administration in El Salvador is doing, just that the administration in El Salvador is way better at it. And the president is much, much better at social media than the last administration here in the US. So, just democracy is fragile, and we have to make sure that we're fighting every day for what we believe in here in this country. I have to give a shout out to the Jennies. There are 2 young women from the university that gave us a tour of some very, very emotional, impactful stuff around the massacres and the killings that happened. And just speaking with them gave me a lot of hope with their youth. And they said that they felt that giving that tour was a privilege because they're able to remind folks of what's happened so that we don't repeat our history. And the other one, the environment. This is one of the most impacted countries in the world when it comes to climate change and water scarcity, privatization of water, the fact that folks can't live in their areas when we talk about reasons for leaving the country. And I think Oscar might have touched on this a little bit in the chat as well. That one's really, really scary to me as well, is water scarcity. So I'll take what Mahasan said, educating people from our experience and what we've seen. And also, not to be an ego about it, but I've been doing some things in the city to address some of these issues, especially when it comes to access and information.
Yeah, just that before, Congressman, I turn it over to you. We were given this data point that in San Salvador, 70% of the water in the system escapes to just bad pipes. So even when we talk about scarcity of water, and that was the ambassador that gave us that number, the system itself loses 70% of its water. It's drinkable water that just goes out into the ocean because the system is old and not really kept up. So yeah, water I think will be a huge thing. But let me stop and just turn it over to Congressman again. Same question. If you can end your final comment, 3 takeaways that you got from the delegation, and 3 things that you can do in your function as a congressman, in the House of Representatives and in your district.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly we can continue to move forward with sort of integrating immigrants into our community. I mean, that was the main reason I went. And I think this visit was a big step in the right direction for that. And I've got other trips planned too, based on the, populations in Prince George's County. Nigeria is going to be up very soon too. So for the same kind of reasons. I think the second is the importance of maintaining some sort of diplomatic engagement between the United States and El Salvador. It's clearly, tense right now, and but I think it's important for us to continue to be involved, because I was reminded when I was down there, even though they're mad at us, or some of the elected officials are, the U.S. engagement and importance in El Salvador and countries around the world cannot be underestimated. And so we should make sure we continue to use our influence, whether it's soft power or other types of approaches. One of the things we proposed too was exchanges. Have students come over, we'll send them. I know that some of that's in place already, but I'd like to see if we could build it out. Business engagement too would be another one. And then the third one I would say is with respect to the border security debate, such as it is here in the United States. I saw a lot of things in El Salvador that I thought were helpful. The reception center in particular, and trying to help to not move that debate forward, but sort of get it back on track. Because right now it's just so deeply partisan. None of it's really aimed at any kind of policy outcomes. It's really just throwing rocks at the other side. So I'm hoping we can move beyond that, and that El Salvador, as an example, could be one way we can do it.
Well, thank you, Congressman Glenn Ivey, Clerk of the Court Hassan El-Amin, Councilmember Connect Aguirre. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today in this report back, and all the other delegates that participated. For us, it's a commitment to take people to the region to get a better sense of what's going on and understand migration flows into the United States. I've always said that El Salvador and U.S. DNA is completely mixed now. There's no way to really separate it, and our histories are joined that way, right? And our communities here in the Washington metropolitan area, LA, Houston, Boston, wherever we are, is better for our migration. But to understand it and create policies of reception, policies of integration, and policies of supporting the countries of origin be better, where immigration is a choice and not a means of survival, is something that we work towards. So on behalf of Carecen DC, on behalf of Alianza Americas, I want to thank you for your participation. I thank you for your time today. And hopefully we can continue this. Anyone interested in participating, please feel free to reach out to us, because this is not a one-off. Just as the Congressman said that he may have other places to go to understand his constituencies, we continue to go to the region to bring better understanding and hopefully better solutions, so that everyone can really have a successful life, have a successful development of their own family. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. We will give you back the rest of your day, and continue to hear from us, and we will provide additional information from the learning we had of this particular delegation and other delegations. So once again, thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Shout out Carecen and Alianza Americas for putting this all together. Really appreciate
Thank
you guys.
you. It was wonderful.
Oscar.
Great job.